open up some things again. But around the world, we're still in about the same situation. Really, last week versus this week, not a lot of difference between the 2 weeks. So I might just move back to our first slide. Sorry, it started in the wrong spot. So if we look around the last week, you can see in the picture there, the last few lines are the last few days, and that's number of new cases per day. And around the world, it's still going upwards. In the last week, we've had 900,000 more new cases diagnosed, and we're pretty certain that's not everyone, because we're not finding all the cases, because some countries now where this virus is going through don't have the capacity to test everyone. For Australia, 50 more cases, so what's that, about 7 a day? And more than half of them were people who, it says from overseas, and I presume that pretty much all of those people will have actually been in hotel quarantine, so no risk to the Australian community of further spread from those people. So really the community spread at the moment in Australia, as far as I could work out, was probably less than 10 people where they couldn't actually work out where it came from. So for Australia, that's pretty good. If we can move to the next slide, thanks. This slide's pretty complicated, but if you type into Google SA coronavirus, then this is one of the slides you will find. And it runs through where we're at the moment, which is step number 2, which is our current restrictions. And now I've put step 2 plus as of 19th of June. So this week, we're actually going to be able to move to having 75 people here next weekend. And if you're in a bigger facility, then for restaurants and other places, there's going to be options to do different things depending on room sizes. As of 25th of June, all the sports can restart. And we now have a date for, people get a bit confused with this idea of the borders being opened or the borders being closed. They haven't actually built a wall. What's been happening at the moment is if you come into South Australia, unless you have a special exemption, you're in 14 days quarantine. So as of 20th of July, that's the current date that the SA government's planning for. If you come back as in South Australia, you won't actually be going into quarantine for 14 days. And I promised last week that I'd go into a little bit about how you catch viruses and how they spread. Well, I wanted to start by looking at, obviously they spread, most of it is caught from respiratory droplets or aerosol particles. And I started to look at defining a droplet or an aerosol, and it all got too hard because different places have different sizes. So I gave up on that and decided we'd actually just look at making it really simple. If we're just sitting here quietly breathing and not talking, then we're putting out 1 to 10 droplets with every breath. So every time you breathe out, there's a few droplets spreading into the air. If you're talking quietly, it's more like 10 droplets. If you're talking loud, then that goes upwards. If you're singing, then it goes upwards again. If you cough, you're probably putting out 30,000 droplets. If you sneeze, 3,000 droplets. If you sneeze, you're putting out 30,000. Now I had a look, I did some calculations. If you're 1.5 meters away from somebody who coughs towards you, it takes 5/100ths of a second for those particles to get to you. So unless you're very, very quick at dodging, if somebody coughs into your face, even if you're 1.5 meters away, you're breathing in what they've coughed out. So that's why it's so important that if you're unwell, you stay away. And you need to stay away from everyone, including people in your house, which I'll get to a bit further along. But if we're looking at how many droplets does it take to catch coronavirus, nobody really knows. If we move to the next slide, we do know that they class it as a close contact if you spend 15 minutes face-to-face with somebody. So that's a cumulative 15 minutes over several days if somebody's unwell, you're classed as a close contact. For a room environment, the best experts are saying that if you're in the same room as somebody for 2 hours, even at a fair distance, then you're classed as somebody who's at risk of catching the virus from them. And I guess we then need to look at, well, how do we adjust those things? Let's look at environmental changes. So moist air captures the particles and drops them to the ground or slows them down as they move through the air. So in moisture air, so if we're in Queensland or if we've got our evaporative air conditioning on, then the air is moister and it slows and captures it. In hot air, those droplets desiccate or they dry out and the virus inside them will be killed. Obviously, the further away you are from somebody, the harder it is to catch it because those droplets are diluting, and you need a certain number of these droplets that you breathe in for you to catch the virus. And then the last one is the ventilation, the amount of air movement decides how much those droplets are scattered. So if they get caught on an air current and taken directly to you, which is essentially what's happened if you cough or sneeze, you produce an air current, which is why we're encouraging people to cough or sneeze into the elbow. Because the trouble is, if I cough into this hand and then touch this surface, the surface has now got that virus on it. So coughing into your elbow, so you're coughing down, and trying to turn away, so you're coughing away from people, is the best way to go through it. Obviously outdoors is better than indoors because the air currents are going to be bigger, and so you're going to scatter those particles away, and so there's a lower density that you breathe in. And unfortunately for us in SA, Queensland's environment's better. Hot and moist is much better than cold and dry. But we're stuck with what we've got, so we've got to go with that. So what do you do if you're sick? Well, most people can probably answer this by now. Obviously you get tested. And the second line there, the Google COVID Testing Centres SA, or if you're watching this from somewhere else in Australia, change SA to wherever you are, is the easiest way to find the list of options available to you. There's drive-through testing available now from pretty much every lab, and there's about 5 or 6 different centres in Adelaide that will do that. There's people who come to your home, you can go to pretty much any of the hospitals, so there's lots of options. Basically, every time you get any sort of respiratory illness, for probably the rest of this year at least, we want you tested. The next one, probably everyone's read. It's now shaking and vibrating in red for you. That's going to count for when we've got people coming here. That counts for whether you're going to go to the shops, whether you need to fill your car with petrol. Basically, if you're sick, every time you go out, you're at risk of giving whatever virus is to other people. Even within the house, it's important you isolate as much as you can within the home. Again, coughing away from people. If you're sitting at a table having a meal, you're actually better off sitting next to each other than you are across the table because you're coughing straight at somebody, etc., etc. So it's actually reasonably simple for us to slow this down, which is obvious because we have slowed it down in Australia. And the last slide for today, I guess I really wanted to make Darren's tip, it's actually just a scripture this time. In John 3, chapter 3, verse 30, he must increase, but I must decrease. So for a lot of us, coronavirus is becoming something we're moving out of, and hopefully there won't be a large second wave to pull us back in. But as we do that, life goes back to more normal, or whatever normal is. And as we do that, we need to think about how do we maintain our relationship with God. And so there's going to be people listening to this who they've been tuning into our meetings for several weeks now who don't usually tune in. And we'd like to encourage you to find out why it is that we're saying the things we're saying, and so we'd encourage you to contact one of us and speak to us some more. And if you're somebody who's always tuned into these meetings, then keep the activities you've done now where you're praying more, you're reading the Bible by yourself more. When your time is used up more by coming to meetings, don't let that decrease the amount of time you're spending by yourself with God. And I'll just leave it there. Thank you.